I want to thank everybody for being here today for our fourth edition of the Age-Friendly University Takeover Series. My name is Jocelyn Protopappas, and I'm the Manager of Special Projects at the Center for Excellence in Aging and Longevity at San Diego State University. SDSU has been an age-friendly university since 2021, but this is our very first age-friendly university month. So all month long at San Diego State, we have been celebrating on campus and virtually, talking about the importance of age diversity and thinking about new ways that we can move SDSU towards reaching those 10 principles of what an age-friendly university is. I'm very excited today about today's session. We are going to be exploring how universities can play a leading role in reducing ageism through intergenerational learning. We know that ageism is something that impacts us on a global level. It impacts our policies, our communities, the organizations that we interact with. It impacts us on an interpersonal level, and even intrapersonally. It impacts how we think about ourselves as we age. Higher education is uniquely positioned to help disrupt these biases and foster understanding. Today, we have Dr. Elizabeth Russell with us. She's an associate professor in the Department of Psychology at Trent University. She'll be presenting The Road to Age-Friendly Universities, the Challenges and Opportunities of an Intergenerational Psychology of Aging course. Dr. Russell's presentation will highlight the design and outcomes of a pilot course that integrated 13 older adult community participants alongside 60 university students. A powerful example of how shared learning environments can reduce ageism and strengthen intergenerational connection. She'll share key insights into the challenges, opportunities, and lessons learned in bringing the age-friendly university framework to life. So please help me in joining and welcoming Dr. Russell. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. It's so great to be here today. I'm really excited to share about this project. This project was something that I've been planning and dreaming about for many, many years. You know, when you do a big project, there's multiple phases and iterations and grant applications and papers and all the things that lead up to that one big thing. And so this was that one big thing for me that I really wanted to do in my career. And so I'm really happy to be able to share that with you today. And hopefully you can take away a couple of things that may be useful to you in dreaming about an intergenerational classroom, perhaps at your university, or maybe even applicable to another similar project. So I just want to acknowledge the funders that have supported my project. They're listed on the side of my screen. I wouldn't be here today, of course, without support from my university and some other organizations. So thank you so much. I think it's such a vote of confidence to see that people believe in this concept of an intergenerational classroom and even more importantly, an intergenerational or an age-friendly university. So thank you to everybody for that. I'm here today on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe in Peterborough, Ontario, and I hope that my work offers, I offer gratitude to the First Nations people for their teachings about and care for of the earth, and I hope that my work is representative of the really important and wonderful examples of intergenerational relationships we see in so many Indigenous communities. And so you see on my screen a map of Canada. I just wanted to position where I literally am sitting today in my office at Trent University. So I'm in Peterborough, which is a small city in Ontario. So you can see the star. It looks like we're close to Toronto, which you probably have heard of, but if you zoom in on this map of Southern Ontario, which is a very big geographic space, you can see that Peterborough is actually quite far. We're a couple of hours from Toronto. So, and there's a picture of our university. We're kind of a rural serving university in a small town, and we have a significant aging population in Peterborough. So we're really well positioned to offer these wonderful opportunities for older adults in our community to come onto campus. Okay, so if I just think for a second, just pause. If I invited you to bring one object, if you were in my class and I said, bring one object to class this week that simply represents you to show and tell, because that's what we're doing in class this week, what would you bring? And this is an example of one of the intergenerational activities we did in my classroom last year when we ran this course. Every week we did these special activities to facilitate connection between older adults and our students. And this one was a particularly meaningful activity because ultimately we found that everybody brought the same thing. All of you watching this webinar, you probably thought of the same thing. Whatever that item is, it all represents just a couple of things, someone meaningful in your life, maybe a milestone you accomplished that you're really proud of or that you hope to accomplish, a person, an experience, like a small list of things. And what we found when we did this activity and similar others is it doesn't matter your age, whether you're an older person, a younger student, we're all thinking about the same thing. And so ultimately, that's the take-home point of this lecture and of my course is that intergenerational connections between people of different generations facilitate age-based equity. So ultimately that the people of the different age groups see each other as similar, as equals, as having, similar interests and feelings and perspectives and experiences. And I'm really proud that that's what our classroom fostered, and that's what our key research findings have demonstrated. So, as Jocelyn introduced so well, a quick background on ageism. Of course, the stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination against older people. But unfortunately, the pandemic provided a case study to actually showcase that ageism does shorten lives. We know that stereotypes of aging are socially pervasive and normalized. I see them and I hear them every day. But ageism is more of a hidden ism. We don't hear about it we don't push back as much against it, perhaps, if we're not in the aging sphere, as some of the other really important, concepts to fight back against. And youth are largely the perpetrators of ageism. And we know through decades of social psychological research that intergroup exposure, just putting people together, is not a quick fix. There has to be meaningful and positive engagement. And so, of course, as a scholar in aging, but also a professor in aging, I'm teaching literally courses on the psychology of aging to my students. Of course, I'm wondering to myself, do universities have a social role or maybe even obligation to play in reducing ageism? So this concept that we heard from in the introduction, that universities are kind of uniquely positioned to create these intergenerational connections to facilitate the reduction of ageism because of these sort of distinct age groups that can happen here. So I wondered that. And so I conducted some research. You can see this is published in 2022. I collected data in my courses and the same course at another university, Cape Breton University, in both 2019 and 2020. It was the winter of 2020, so collecting that follow-up data was challenging, and we pivoted to online, but we did it because it was so important to me to learn. I just wanted to know, in a lecture-based classroom on aging alone, so just me talking to students, teaching a regular course, tests, exams, lectures, etc., what can happen? Because I started to realize when I taught the course early on in my career that students would come forward at the end and say, I was ageist and now I'm not. To me, that was really much more important than anything else I could have achieved with them in terms of course content and learning. And they would say, I don't fear aging anymore, and I used to, or I'm really going to go talk to older people I know or that are in my family about their lives because I see that there's so much more than the number. And so to me, I wanted to do this study to kind of see what was happening in a lecture-based course first. And so, so I developed this concept of the age-conscious student. You can see the triangle there. So we define an age-conscious student in this paper as a student, who took this course and has a deeper understanding of the aging process, has a reduction in an increased awareness of ageism, and an enhanced personal connection with aging. So really more positive and feeling like they can engage with the concept of aging themselves. So these findings across these couple of years and couple of courses at two universities really gave me the confidence to say, okay, what I think is happening in the course in terms of like listening about aging makes you less ageist essentially is happening. And so I want to take it to the next level. So that's why then when I finished that study, I thought to myself, okay, what if the class was intergenerational? What if we actually bring older people into the room, into the space with students on a weekly basis throughout the semester, just to provide that additional level of engagement with persons most knowledgeable on our topic, which is aging. So bringing in older people. And I'm going to share a video with you right now about what our course looked like last winter. It's just 1 minute long. So that's Tabitha, my TA and research coordinator. You can see some of the sharing that's happening. This was the show and tell activity. We did some arts-based activities as well. You can see there's a lot of discussion and dialogue. And I'm still lecturing. So I'm hopeful that that gave you just a snapshot of what our intergenerational classroom actually looked like. And so nothing happens in academia or anything in life really in a vacuum alone. So I led this project. I was the principal investigator of the study and the course instructor. I taught the course, and Tabitha, who you see pictured on my right, was the research coordinator, and she integrated this study as a part of her master's thesis, which she actually just successfully defended a couple of weeks ago. So I'm really proud of all her support in this project. I couldn't have done it without her. So a description of our 2024 intergenerational classroom, and all these pictures I'm showing you are from that classroom. So it was a third-year Psychology of Aging course at Trent University, where I work. And it was just a regular course focused on biopsychological and social underpinnings of aging. And it was a typical lecture-based university course. So just the average student taking this course. And it was actually the same course as the age conscious research, the one with the triangle diagram that I showed a minute ago. It's the same course that research was conducted in. So just to show you the continuity. And it was a pretty big course. We had 60 students in the course and then 13 community participants who were 65 or older. And recruitment considered both best fit in the intergenerational classroom environment and also principles of equity, diversity, inclusion, and indigeneity. We really wanted the students to see themselves represented as best as possible in some of the older adults. And so we made a significant effort to include a diverse group of people in multiple ways. Thinking about how people are different is so unique. And so we wanted to showcase that. So the course composition is listed there. So there were formal lectures. So I always lectured, on just regular university stuff. But then we also had, this was fundamental, the informal intergenerational activities. They were both indoors and outdoors, just around where our classroom was. And these were fundamental, I believe, to the success of the intergenerational classrooms and provided that connection across groups that simply couldn't have happened if I was just lecturing the whole time. And then we had an informal gathering after class every week. That was something that evolved. I didn't plan that because at the end of the classes, during the intergenerational activities, there was so much conversation between people of different generations that we essentially couldn't conclude. So we were lucky enough that the space was not booked after class, and we booked it, and we just said, like, you can keep hanging around and chatting because that's seemed to be what people wanted to do, which was a really special thing that we noticed kind of early on. So that just shows the importance of those intergenerational activities. And the intergenerational activities were really the point of them was not necessarily to reinforce course content, although some were academic in nature. They were really just to facilitate connection. So they were things like there's arts-based activities. We did a scavenger hunt around the classroom indoors and out. We did that sort of sharing activity and things like that to ultimately facilitate conversation was the point of them. And research, evaluation, and knowledge mobilization was completely embedded within the project. So it wasn't just a classroom exercise. So I'm going to share some of our findings with you today. So the data source for the research and evaluation in particular were 33 individual interviews we conducted with all of the community participants and with 20 of the students. And then in terms of the evaluation part that I'll speak about, we also based it on our own experiences as well, just in terms of the implementation recommendations. And then the research itself was just the interviews, of course, and we conducted an iterative, collaborative, qualitative analysis on those 33 interviews to come up with our key findings that I'll share. And what did evaluation and knowledge mobilization look like? It was sort of threefold. So we did a video series. So I showed you the one video. We really wanted to show what we did, and we knew this had to be an intentional thing that we built into the classroom rather than doing it afterwards. So we did a video series that included 5 or 6 snapshot videos that are just 1 minute, like the one I showed you, just to showcase things, and then one feature length video that was like 6 or 7 minutes to kind of hear the voices of myself and the community participants and the students and sort of give an overview of the key research findings. We embedded photography as well. As you can see, telling the story of the intergenerational classroom would not really work without photographs. So we embedded that intentionally as well, which had a lot of considerations in terms of ethics. And then final reports, which I linked in case this PowerPoint is shared here, but my website is on the last slide if you're just accessing this video. So we have a final report, our project report that's pictured here on the left, project report, to share our key research findings. And then we created a pedagogical toolkit, which shares sort of how we created an intergenerational classroom so that others can do the same and learn from what we learned and maybe not have to start from the ground up like we did. So I'm going to share the key findings from both the research and sort of the implementation element with you today. And then if you want to learn more, those documents are available. So the key research findings are threefold. We found that the intergenerational classroom facilitated the development of age-based equity. So this sort of, I see people of different ages as more similar to me than I saw them as maybe previously as more different than I am. We found that it reduced perceived generational divides and humanized people of all ages. And I'm going to provide some supporting quotes for each of those. So in terms of age-based equity, a student said, this course was the first time that I ever heard that word, ageism, which I think kind of goes to show about the progress and the learning that I had made about that. So of course, that's the best compliment as a professor you can get if a student is now less ageist because of a course. So that's something that they will take with them forever in their lives. I'm a community participant said, I'm not so worried that these are the folks that are going to look after us when we're old now. We heard that a lot. In terms of reduced perceived generational divides, a community participant said, I think in sharing back some of my experiences and them, the students sharing back, you realize the common denominators, right? So we heard that this went both ways, from older adults perceiving students as maybe different and now seeing the similarities as well. A student said, I just feel more open to talking with older adults and I realize how beneficial it is now. So that's a great thing to hear. And finally, humanized people of all ages. A community participant said, they all gave us such renewed hope for the future. So we repeatedly heard this from our community participants, that learning about students and what they're going through and what they face really gave them a positive perspective on today's youth and for the future that they're encountering now and leaving behind for children and grandchildren as well. So those are really special research findings to be able to share, and I'm really proud of that. And then plus, so we built connections with these people. And so we've heard since we did the research, which is kind of right after the class ended, that there have been really impactful and actually even enduring, like it's almost 2 years now, peer connections, peer relationships, and also intergenerational relationships. So pictured on the screen, you see an older community participant and a student, and there's a couple of other students that get together like all the time. This particular student, when their family came over from the other side of the world to Canada for her graduation, it was really important that she bring her family to meet this community participant and like have coffee and visit, because that was such an important intergenerational relationship that was facilitated. So we're actually doing current follow-up research with people just to find out a little bit more than just the anecdotes that we're hearing, because we think that's so impactful. And all we did was facilitate the connection, and it sort of has snowballed from there. And that's just one example of those relationships, both peer and intergenerational. So we know that there's groups of community participants who did not know each other before. They were strangers and now are ongoing peer, like friends, and have dinner together and that kind of thing. So that's really important too. And one community participant has actually, since she loved the experience so much, that she's become a Trent student. She's going to do her degree. And so that's a really exciting take-home point as well. So now I'd like to share some more logistical points for developing an intergenerational classroom. And this is more a couple of slides of lists, but I think that they're key points that you might want to hear if you think, wow, I'd really like to implement this, because there's a lot we learned about how it's both difficult and obviously beneficial, but like how to sort of work through those difficulties. So I'm going to I'm going to go through this kind of quickly. I want to provide some recommendations. So planning and logistics. You really need to think about the size of the classroom. And I know as faculty members, we often have no say or limited say over where we teach. But sometimes if you can, the accessibility of the room is fundamental. It's critical that there are, say, for example, tables versus fixed desks or close to washrooms and that kind of thing. So thinking about the size, you need to have people being able to move around in the classroom, as you saw, rather than just sitting. In terms of recruitment of community participants, you need to begin as early as possible recruiting people because there's quite a lot that goes into that process and using varied recruitment methods. And you have to think about how are you going to choose those participants when you have more people interested than you have space. So we had 13 spaces and we had more people that were interested. So how will you decide essentially? Campus navigation and parking is really problematic, I think, on many university campuses. So as you can see pictured here, we went above and beyond. We really wanted to accommodate those people and make sure they knew exactly where to go, that they felt welcome. We literally, as you can see, had people walking them in from the parking lot up to the classroom, etc. In the dead of winter. So we really thought about that versus, okay, park here, come to this classroom. Classroom orientation, we found it beneficial to host an orientation for both groups separately beforehand to kind of be like, this is what we're doing and this is how it's going to work. And then, as you can see, the first class we had it catered. It was an introduction, icebreakers. We had name tags. We just really wanted to make it for everybody involved, like to understand how special this was and to facilitate that connection so that it wasn't in any way awkward or uncomfortable. That was really important. We found that the intergenerational group activities are absolutely critical. So some were focused on community building, as I talked about, and others were more academic. So like brainstorming course assignments with between students and community participants, etc. And these were, I would never recommend you don't do these activities because you have to find a way to facilitate connection other than just sitting in the classroom together, which looks more like auditing a course. We did a midpoint evaluation with both groups. And then we actually concluded the course. I do kind of creative group assignments in my class. You can see some of the students there on the right presenting that. And we did it sort of an informal celebration where the students presented their work and community participants like heard it. And it was a very informal, fun activity. So it was kind of a nice way to celebrate what had happened. And then knowledge mobilization. So we found that photography and videography is absolutely invaluable in telling the story, but you have to think about that beforehand in terms of how you're going to incorporate that, how you're going to think through ethics. So recommending that you do that. And also, if you're going to do research and evaluation, which we did, you have to consider the additional layer of ethics associated with the scholarship of teaching and learning research. So for example, I was the course instructor, but yet I was also the PI on the project. So how do you navigate the ethics for that? So we did, and we worked through that, but just something to really think about ahead of time. And then budgetary considerations. So every university has access to its own types of support, but we think that it's very important to pay for parking for the community participants, some of the supplies for the activities, catering at the start and end we found really nice, honorariums for the participants, paying for photography and videography, and HR in terms of coordinator. I couldn't have done this myself without Tabitha. She was sending ongoing emails all the time, working with individual community participants, and I focused on the teaching of the course and the developing of the intergenerational stuff. So it was a collaborative effort. So the efforts to obtain a budget to pay for that person is invaluable. I wouldn't recommend a faculty member take this on their own. Okay, so we encountered challenges, and these are 8 that I am highlighting mostly for you to be aware of, not to sort of scare you off. So recruitment, we had a very high demand to participate. We actually we were shocked. We thought we would have a hard time filling our seats. It's the dead of winter. Who would want to come up to Trent University? We're kind of out of town in the winter and sit in the university classroom for 3 hours a week for 13 weeks. But 12 weeks, but we actually had so many people interested, more than we could accommodate. So I think that was a challenge. Parking, just to highlight here again, is a huge challenge. We had to work with parking services, not just at the outset, but on a weekly basis to ensure that the parking spots that we tried to reserve were actually available. So that's an ongoing conversation. The class size, we had to make sure that we maintain small intergenerational group ratios. So you really need to think about how many students do you have in your class and how many community participants ideally do you need to facilitate those ratios, and then layered on top of that the classroom size, like the fire code, for example. Is it the same as your course cap? If so, you'll need to get the course cap lowered to accommodate those extra people in the room. So just additional things to think about. So I talk here about capacity in the room versus course registration. So for us, that was a challenge that we figured out. accessibility as well, because you don't always have say over the classroom that you teach in, but at the same time, you really need, like I say, tables versus desks if possible, near washrooms, really accessible parking. So think about, most universities meet minimum accessibility standards, but is there a classroom you can request well in advance that meets the most accessible standards and is big enough that can facilitate movement? So for example, we had, like, it was the winter, we had winter coats and backpacks and extra people and stuff, and we had them literally moving around and using craft supplies and doing activities and stuff. So if we were in a tight space, even if that was appropriate from a course, a room capacity perspective, it wouldn't have really worked. It wouldn't have been comfortable. Another challenge was getting through course content. So what does that really mean? That means balancing work and fun. People were having so much fun talking and sharing that yeah, it was hard to get through my lecture content, right? And that's a good thing, because I would have community participants were invited essentially during lectures to put up their hand and contribute to the lecture or ask questions, just like any student would. And there was more of that happening, and they'd build upon, and then the students would ask. So there was more really positive academic dialogue happening in my classroom just during the lectures in relation to my material than normal. And so, you'd run out of time, and then you'd have these intergenerational activities that cannot be missed. So just thinking about balancing the work and the fun, I think, is really important. And I say here, for challenges to address this, consider booking the room for an hour after class for social time. Um, scholarship of teaching and learning research, significant extra layers when collecting timely student data. We've really encountered challenges with recruiting students to participate in research, because it had to sort of be at the end of the semester, because the course had to be over to participate in sharing their experiences. But yet at that time, they're focused on final exams, they're focused on assignments, and then after that, it's the summertime, they're gone, they have summer jobs, etc. So figuring out how to, like, include them in research was a challenge. So for example, we offered varied opportunities towards the very end of the semester and during the exam period. We offered them at different times of the day. We offered them remote versus in person. We even offered focus group opportunities, or opportunities for students to just bring a friend if they wanted to an interview, because we were hearing from students that they felt a little, like, uncomfortable with not uncomfortable, but they were just unsure about going into the research setting. So we thought that if you brought a friend, or we provided a group opportunity, that would help. And it did. It really helped students just, feel like they wanted to participate in research. So just thinking through different opportunities, but then also considering sort of the ethical challenges. So as the instructor, I can't collect data from my own students. So we had to have a plan in place for others to do that. So it's just an interesting thing to think through. And then 7, another challenge was, it literally doubled the work of teaching the course for me as the instructor. So assistance is necessary. So I would recommend hiring a coordinator to deal with that challenge. And then the last challenge is a great challenge. It's ending respectfully. We found that almost everyone on both sides of the age spectrum really wanted things to continue. And of course they could, have relationships outside of class, but they wanted more, and it was sad when it went over. So that's why we really valued having those celebratory events at the end of the class. We had that last one where they shared their group projects, and it was a really nice, informal thing. There was grading involved. We had to grade their projects, but it did feel like a celebration. There was food. And then we actually had a celebration of community participants only, the volunteers, a couple of months later, just to really thank them. And so we think that that approach kind of helped conclude it without just being sort of like, and it's the last class, like, goodbye, have good luck on the exam to some of you, and the rest of you we won't see again. So thinking through ending respectfully, because there was a lot of interest in continuing things, and obviously you have to think about capacity. So finally, I want to share 6 questions to ask yourself, because I hear a lot of people saying, wow, that's great, like, we should do this. So these are just questions, aren't sort of pros or cons, to preemptively consider when deciding that you're going to undertake the creation of an intergenerational classroom. And you can see the picture here is from our event that we had in June, just to celebrate the community participants, to thank them. And so a practical question is, do you have time in your schedule to devote more than you would to a typical course? Yes or no? If you don't, maybe another year, because it does take a lot of planning. Can you hire a coordinator? Because there's so much back and forth communication, I found, with my university and with the community, prior to the event or prior to the classroom, all semester long, with parking. with students. Like it was a lot. So having a coordinator whose job it is to do that, and obviously constant consultation with myself, but that was really helpful. In terms of recruitment, a practical consideration is how will you find and choose your participants, and how will you make sure that you're using an EDII lens so that you're including people from various backgrounds, because that's really something that I think is kind of important. So thinking through that. So for example, are there different organizations in your community that you can reach out to? Can you put up posters? Can you, are there organizations out there that maybe you don't have a connection with, but is there a broad, say, aging related community-based an age-friendly organization that can liaise with smaller organizations to make sure you're kind of including as many people from diverse backgrounds as well as different neighborhoods in your community to try to help with that equity lens a little bit. In terms of on campus, I encourage you to really strongly think through the parking situation. Are there options for parking that you can leverage? And if the answer is no, you might have to think of a really creative out of the box situation. Can you get the best classroom space? Because, faculty may not be able to. I was lucky enough to be in a really good classroom space, but now I know I've figured out the process on like how to request it and what's the logistics or what's the logic I need and how do I, share this. And it's a little bit easier now that I've done this and I can point to why I need this one really good classroom, but before it wasn't. So, thinking about like, do you have those kind of, can you leverage that or not, because the space is very important. If it was a bad space, I don't think this would have been a successful course. Does your university have a unit that supports aging that can help you with promotion, with maybe finances, etc.? So is there a research center on aging? Is there a continuing education program? Is there an age-friendly university focused organization? Those kinds of things that could be helpful. In teaching, you might want to consider, are you willing to let go of some of the course content or simplify it or, kind of condense it a little bit? So we think a diverse range of informal intergenerational activities where the primary goal is to facilitate connection is worth letting go of some of the course content. We think that not only did it facilitate doing these activities, and they weren't long, like 30 minutes maybe, not only did they facilitate this beautiful connection between people, but they did reinforce course content. We repeatedly heard from students that they found it easier to prepare for their exams. They came up with more, I noticed this, they came up with more interesting and meaningful essay topics, for example, or project topics, because they were actually talking to people that were aging in an aging course. So I think if you let go of some of the course content that you're saying, it's probably okay because you're balancing it out with these other opportunities. And then they're taking home more after they've forgotten the answers to the exams. They're taking home more and learning more about aging and ageism. And I think that's a bigger goal anyways. In terms of research, you want to think about, will you embed research into your project? Because if you don't, you're kind of letting this amazing opportunity go. And then if so, how will you do that? Who will collect your data? You need to think about that in particular because of the ethical considerations of teaching research. And then how will you maximize student participation in your research? So we had no problem with our community participant recruitment, but as I said, we did have some challenges that I think we overcame really well with student participation, but you need to have a plan because when it comes time to collect that set of data, you have a very small window. So you need to be able to think on your feet and maximize student participation from those who do wish to participate. So making it accessible, basically. And then knowledge mobilization. How will you capture and share what you've accomplished? I don't think my slides would be as effective if I didn't have these pictures in that 1 minute snapshot video or in a different context, a longer video. And we've used obviously social media and other outlets to really share. So for example, our reports to help others kind of learn and develop about intergenerational classrooms, whether it be the outputs from a research perspective or the implementation stuff. I don't think we could have done it without those report documents, and we couldn't have created those reports without the research that was embedded within it and without the knowledge mobilization to literally showcase what it is that we did. So it's not just about promoting what you did, it's about uplifting others to kind of do the same or to be invited to do the same in their own way. I think it's hard to showcase and to share without those elements. So I'm hopeful that those different considerations from a practical perspective showcase the realities of developing and implementing an intergenerational classroom. But also I'm hopeful that the research outcomes show you the benefits, I believe. I think it's really worth doing. So as you can see on the slide now, I have Intergenerational Classroom 2026. So we didn't do it in 2025. I was on sabbatical, but this coming winter, you can see in the orange circle, it says, join us this winter 2026 at Trent University. So this is our recruitment poster. And this is what the community, we've shared this in many ways with our community. And so applications are actually open right now until October 31st, which is Friday. And so we've peeked in at some of the applications. We give people really diverse ways to reach out. So they can call a phone number and leave a voicemail. They can send me an email, or we have an online form that's really concise, and we work with people to sort of gather that information. So making sure that there's lots of opportunities for people to engage and share their interests. So our 2026 classroom has many, many applicants already. And I'm going to just share with you a couple of quotes that we're seeing in those little text boxes or on voicemails from people who are interested. One person said, I learned about the intergenerational classroom today, and I am bursting with excitement. How many professors get to hear that about their university courses? Another said, I would be truly thrilled to take part in this wonderful opportunity. All the best for your most thoughtful and innovative undertaking. And third, what a terrific opportunity for the various generations to gain insights and connections. So people seem to intuitively get it when our poster only has so much information, but I think at the same time, it showcases the key points that we're trying to achieve here. You can also see in these quotations, when people sign, how meaningful this opportunity is for community participants who are older. So it's a little bit different than when you have, say, like a volunteer opportunity that maybe students are engaging in to enhance their CVs or gain skills. This is different. This is something that people are putting their hands up and saying, the community participants are putting their hands up and saying, like, I want to learn. I want to be on campus. I want to engage with our young students. And so that's why I'm saying you really have to be mindful of how are you selecting your participants, because it can be difficult for people who aren't included. So for example, we provide other intergenerational opportunities as well. And we actually get people to rank them in terms of what they're most interested in. And some people are interested in other things other than the intergenerational classroom once they kind of hear about our other activities that are happening. And so that's one way that I might recommend to sort of deal with this, because you really have an obligation once you put this out there to support everyone as best as you can. So in conclusion, our intergenerational classroom, we think, was a transformational way to reduce ageism and to facilitate age-based equity among people of all ages. And so in terms of next steps, we are doing it again in 2026, and we've also applied for a grant to look at other intergenerational initiatives happening that I am not leading, both in universities and outside of the university, just in the community, to look at outcomes there as well, so to sort of look at, is it the university setting, or is it the intergenerational connections that are happening, or maybe it's both. So that's what's happening next with our research. And I'm really, really proud to say that our work has reduced ageism, increased equity between groups, because I think that's the most meaningful thing that someone who studies aging and teaches aging can achieve. So hopefully this might be something to inspire you to maybe think about how your university could support the same. Thank you very much. My email is there. Feel free to reach out if you like. And our website is there. And you can find on the website, we have a tab called Experiential Learning and Aging. And that's where we have all of our videos, our reports, publications, all the different outputs, and our current recruiting for the 2026 iteration as well. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'm going to end the screen share now.
Thank you, Dr. Russell. I am so blown away by your research and this model of learning. Speaking of bursting with excitement, I was like taking vigorous notes during this, because I think that there's so many unique and interesting components that you had here, not only just the way you brought older adults into the classroom, but also the video aspect. And there's so many great takeaways here. I personally just wanted to ask a few questions. Someone asked a question. I'll let them ask their first question. So somebody asked, but is there a cost for older adults to participate in the program?
No, it was free of charge. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think you said you provided an honorarium to some of
Yeah, we
the
provided
students.
an honorarium at the end, and we provided so parking costs money at the university, and we paid for their parking. So that was about $1,500. So it was a significant investment.
Oh yeah.
And then if people didn't have a car, we would have paid and will pay for their like public transportation. And if that's not accessible to them, we figure something out for people to get to campus. But there's no cost to participate except your time.
That is so cool. We just had another speaker last week talking about the built environment on campus and how wayfinding and parking are
Yeah.
some of the biggest challenges to a lot of places. So love that you addressed that barrier. I was curious about the video piece. How did you know going into it that that was going to be such a critical component for spreading the word about this and for capturing what your
Yeah.
project as a whole?
Great question. So at the time, I was the director of the Trent Center for Aging and Society, and I had developed, mostly during the pandemic, actually, because everything pivoted to online, a knowledge mobilization hub. And that hub is still exists, and it's there to sort of provide video translation, like these really quick snapshots of research in aging. That's what we wanted to do in the pandemic. Like, how can we share what we are studying in an online way? And so for me, I kind of developed that, and I actually created a graduate course to teach students how to do that. So for me, it kind of is second nature at this point. I consider it my responsibility as a researcher to go beyond the peer review, even the reports at this point, to how can we share things in these like really quick snapshots. So that was the idea. I taught the course the year before, and I had the students as an option for a creative project do a video. And I had one student, Amelia, she just did an incredible job. She had no background in videography. She just had an eye for it. And so I hired her. I remember when to do all those videos. And I remember when she submitted her project, I was like, I'm going to be hiring you to do this. I don't know what for. And then this was the opportunity. And it was her idea to do the snapshot videos because there was so much. She's like, I don't think I can put this all in as short a key video as you want. Because I was like, I don't want our key video to be very long, like 5, 6 minutes at the absolute most. But she said, even that, there's too much to fit. So why don't I do these 1 minute? I was like, that's genius. So I think that's the way to go is those snapshots.
I love it because I think also, when we think about this age-friendly university initiative as a whole, a
Hmm.
lot of times when we're even looking for media or pictures of older
Yeah.
adults on campus
Yeah.
or non-traditional students, it's very difficult to get that. So I think this is also a really great way to show the age-friendly university initiative in that way. Um, I just had two more questions. One thing we encounter a lot when we talk about different generations on campus is the difference in learning styles that traditional age students may have versus non-traditional. Was that something that came up in class for you when you were trying to teach? Were you finding that there's difference in generations when it comes to learning styles?
I don't think so. I think the one thing that I noticed is the community participants were they were laser focused on listening. Like they didn't have devices. They were just listening. And, that was I'm not used to that. So that was really great. And I felt good about that, but also a little intimidated. In terms of the students, they have their own ways of listening. So that was a difference that I noticed. But in terms of learning styles, I'm not sure. I mean, part of that is the students would have been taking notes and the participants obviously weren't being tested. But I don't think there was a big difference in learning styles. But I think for the students that in the past had always been like, we just want something more, we want this lived experience. I think that intergenerational component addressed that in a way and providing this like more real element. So, for example, when I was talking about hearing loss, and I remember one of our community participants put her hand up multiple times and like talked about that. So that addressed the need for students who maybe like just listening to me or reading the textbook wasn't enough, provided that third dimension.
Yeah, I love that experiential learning piece. That is so cool. I was just thinking about too for other aspects of psychology and the classroom having, when you're doing like child development, just that different exposure to the actual
Yeah.
people that you're learning about makes a huge difference. So
Yeah.
I really love this. Let me see. Okay, and then on a final note, from your perspective as a professor, these obviously this was a massive undertaking and there were so many moving pieces here.
Yeah.
Have you thought about ways that you might, in other courses you're teaching, incorporate this experiential learning or add small nuggets or any other thoughts
Hmm.
on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I've thought so many times about how to incorporate this because of course older adults, they want to hear about more than just aging. They could be interested in many topics. So for me, my this is the only course that incorporates the intergenerational component at this time. But for me, my broader vision aside from courses is to create this really goes with the age-friendly university to look at how our university can not just be more age-friendly, but more intergenerational. So that means not just my courses, but other people's as well. Is there a way that we can set it up so there's lots of courses that are intergenerational, but it's a built-in infrastructure that doesn't just fall to the faculty member? So that's where my vision really goes to, is less about developing this like me, Elizabeth Russell, on my own, and more as a structural thing that maybe there's some funding, maybe there's some coordination behind, so that a faculty member in, like, I don't know, biology or anthropology could be like, I really want to do this. I don't know how to do this. Can you help me? And we'd be like, yes, we have these resources. So that's how I see it. And I really think that fits with the age-friendly university mandate.
Mhm. Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Russell. This has been so cool. I will say, if for those who have been watching or who will watch this in the future, for me, it's been inspirational every week to hear from different people who are working on the same things that I am and have the same, parallel vision. And it's just fantastic to see the work in action and to see it done in so many different ways. So, thank you from SDSU for sharing your knowledge and your research. We are so grateful. And for all of those who are tuned in here and then in the future, thank you for joining us for our 4-week Age Friendly University takeover.
Okay. Thanks, Jocelyn.
Bye.
Bye.
Yep.